Hey guys, J.W. Oker here, and I'm taking you today to a cemetery, because I always take you to a cemetery because it's one of the few places that I feel comfortable talking to a sheet of glass in my hand in public. But this is a cool cemetery, very old, 17th century, actually established in 1635, so pretty early in the 17th century. It is the burying ground of the first settlers of Newbury, Massachusetts. And as you look around, there are not that many stones left. Some are here, some have been worn down to nubs. Some are illegible, some are just covered in lichen. And most of them have been replaced with newer stones to mark those very old bones. Now, I'm not bringing you here just because it's an old cemetery. That's reason enough to come see this place. But it's also the site of a witch cenotaph. A witch cenotaph. A cenotaph is a gravestone marking someone who isn't buried there. And the reason why this cemetery has a witch cenotaph is because witches weren't allowed to be buried in the burial grounds with the rest of people for whatever reasons. So this witch we're talking about, and I'm about to show you here in a second, her name was Elizabeth Morse. She's come to be known as the Witch of Newbury. It all started in 1679. In 1679, her and her husband, William Morse, started undergoing some spectral phenomenon. Like sticks and stones would start hitting the house, stuff would start clattering down the chimney, strange hog sounds indoors. They lived with their grandson. They were in their 60s, and the only other person in the house was their grandson. So some suspicion was thrown at him, and in fact, a neighbor named Caleb Powell came up to the Morses and said, "Hey, listen, let me try to teach your grandson a lesson, and that'll solve your spectral problems real fast." Of course, once the word witch is introduced into a story in the colonial times, it doesn't go away. So when people heard that Powell was going to be schooling this boy, they thought Powell was a wizard. He went on trial, was acquitted. There was no witchery afoot. But still, again, that word witch had been put into the consciousness of the town, so they had to do something about it. So then they turned to Elizabeth Morse and said, "You must be the witch." And they tried her and convicted her, put her in a Boston jail for about a year, and then they decided not to hang her. They decided instead to put her under house arrest. She wasn't allowed to leave within a certain distance of her house without her husband or without a preacher. So it's not the usual outcome. She would go on to die about a decade later. I think 1690 is when she died. All right, so here's the grave of William Morse, her husband. See, he died in 1683, just a couple of years after her imprisonment and conviction. So he got out of that picture pretty fast after that. Now, his wife, Elizabeth, nobody knows where she's buried. She wasn't allowed to be buried here in the cemetery with the rest of the God-fearing. So no tombstone to her. But later on, the Historical Society, or whoever cares about these things, decided to make her a cenotaph, at least memorialize her here in the graveyard where her husband moulders somewhere down there. And her cenotaph is on the other side of his gravestone. There you go, wife Elizabeth, convicted as a witch by her community. May she lay in peace beyond these walls. Somewhere out there is the grave of a convicted witch, but not a hanged one. So there's that. So that's what I got for you today, something quick and sloppy. I just happened to be in the neighborhood and just jumped into the cemetery with a phone and a story. And I hope you dug it. Oh, and if you're in the area and you want to see a little bit more about the Witch of Newbury, go to downtown Newburyport, which is about 4 miles from the cemetery. And on the side of a building there's a plaque dedicated to her that marks where her house arrest would have been. A really old cemetery, cool history, and a witch cenotaph. right there for anybody to come see.